Ahoy everyone, my name is Bobby Shortle and I'm here with Nick Rocco Scalia, and we are the Intrepid Filmographers. Every mini-series we chart a course through the full filmography of an under-discussed genre or journeyman filmmaker. In this expedition we do our best to try and be explorers, using our years of film knowledge to help guide us, but always being open to discovering new things about the medium we love so much. This week we continue our special expedition into the films of Peter Jackson, and today we are talking about his 2008 literary adaptation of The Lovely Bones, and find out if it really is salmon, like the fish. Nick, how are you doing tonight, my friend?
I've been better, to be honest with you.
This movie didn't leave you in like a happy-go-lucky mood, this movie? Not a happy-go-lucky mood?
No. It was kind of the opposite of that, really.
Can't imagine why, Nick.
Me and Roger Ebert, I think, might be on the same page, which we often were, R.I.P. Roger Ebert. Yeah, I remember him really not liking this movie, so I went back and read the review, and I'm kind of with him on this one.
So, The Lovely Bones, 2009. I said 2008 in the intro. It's 2009.
Actually, So, released in 2009, didn't get wide release until January 2010, because they thought this thing was going to win some Oscars.
Yeah,
it almost did.
It got nominated for one. How many? What did it get nominated for? One Oscar for the Tooch.
Yes,
little touch of the Tooch. In there. So yeah, it's 2009. The Lovely Bones. Peter Jackson coming off King Kong, which we talked about last time. This was meant to be his small movie in between big movies, right? At the time, not supposed to make The Hobbit, not even on his radar at the time, right? That's something he has said of this time that he's not going to do. He's not going to direct The Hobbit, right? And it's still caught up in like all the rights stuff that has been plaguing it for all of these years. But he's doing The Lovely Bones, which is based on a book, a 2002 book, I believe, by Alice Sebold. Hugely popular book, like 8 million copies sold in its first year, one of the best-selling books of its year. Like a sensation, one of those books that's like a sensation, right? That almost everybody reads, everybody who reads books definitely reads it, and it kind of spills over into people who don't usually read books, right? Read the book. I don't read books regularly.
Before it was even finished, which is
I didn't know that.
I didn't either. I remember it being a very popular book, but apparently someone had the inside line on this in 2000. It was released in 2002, and had the decent idea to potentially adapt this into a movie, which I do understand. I don't think it should have been adapted into this movie, but you could see how this might have been a fairly well-received film had it not been this.
And also you can definitely see, right, the sort of stuff that attracts Peter Jackson to adapting it and wanting to make it, right? It does sort of fit into this, the heavenly creatures sort of milieu, right? The sort of literary sort of fantasy thriller kind of a thing, right? Right, this kind of tragedy thriller. So when
it's centered on a girl of about the same age as the characters in that movie. I mean, in this case, she's the victim rather than the murderer, but it is a murder story revolving around an adolescent young woman. And I remember it took him a while to get to this. I mean, there were other directors attached to this before him. We'll talk about them. But I remember seeing Peter Jackson being attached to this property and thinking, great. I did the same thing with this because I never read The Lovely Bones, but I knew about it. Everything I had read about it suggested it would be really good. And by the time it was always on my list. And by the time I got around to actually potentially reading it, I saw that Peter Jackson was making a movie about it. And I was like, well, I'll just do the same thing I did with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is not read the books because he did such a good job with those. I'll let Peter Jackson's version of the story be my version of the story. Stupid mistake on my part in this case.
Yeah,
I bet that book is really good. You've read it.
I read the book. I don't know exactly what year, but it was probably a couple of years before this movie came out. It wasn't when it was published. It definitely was in like paperback in like 2006 or something. It's somewhere in that range. 2006, 2007, somewhere in that range. Absolutely loved it. It's a book I absolutely loved at the time. I've not gone back and read it again since I read it then. But it had a big effect on me, and obviously Peter Jackson at the time, one of my favorite directors. So I'm very excited, right, when this gets announced, and I definitely was in that mind of like, oh, this is going to be like, his Christopher Nolan, like The Prestige, right? Like this, the thing he does in between the really big things. It's for Peter Jackson in this part of his career, modestly budgets, like $60 million budget, right? It's a pretty at least the real world stuff, very small scale, very intimate, with this more elaborate sort of fantasy, section of it, or supernatural section of it, I guess is probably the better way of putting it.
Which he had already done on a fairly limited budget for Heavenly Creatures. So it was, I mean, you understand why. Lynn Ramsey was the earlier filmmaker who was attached to this project for quite a while, who's a very, very good filmmaker and a very different filmmaker from Peter Jackson, and kind of wanted to take the story in a slightly different direction, make a much darker, more adult-oriented movie. But you can definitely see how this could be this bestseller that this film was, and with the previous things that Peter Jackson had done, it kind of made sense when he got attached to this. Spielberg was actually attached to this for a while too, and DreamWorks ended up, I believe they produced it.
Yeah, there's the logo still at the front of this movie. The logo still at the front of this movie. And him and Jackson had a little bit of a thing going on at this point, because the Tintin stuff is happening right around this as well, which they were supposed to be 2 Tintin movies, one produced by Peter Jackson and directed by Steven Spielberg, which did come out, and then one that was the flip, that Spielberg would produce and Jackson would direct, and then The Hobbit kind of threw that into disarray, as well as the first Tintin, while being successful, not being, I think, as successful as they expected it to be, right? So this partnership happens here. I think that, we're going to talk a lot about this movie, obviously, but I'm gonna kick off with it right here, only because this concept of Lynn Ramsey being the original director, she's much better suited to what this source material is than Jackson is, just instinctually, because the book is much darker and meaner, as well as, it has uplifting stuff. It gets to an uplifting place, but it's a darker, seedier, meaner book than the movie is trying to be, right? The movie, and
which I didn't know, based on a real experience from Alice Sebold's life. She wasn't killed, but other than that, her and Suzy Salmon, there's some parallels there.
Yes.
And so we are, we were having a talk about this off mic about how little I was looking forward to talking about this movie, because I kind of want to make fun of this movie, but the subject matter is so serious, I feel a little bad doing that. That's particularly true because although it's not a true story, it is based on a devastating, traumatic personal experience that the author of the source novel went through. And so in some sense, to make fun of Peter Jackson's movie, The Lovely Bones, is to, smile at a serious incident that happened to Alice Sebold in real life. But I'm still going to make fun of this movie.
Yes, I'm going to give us cover on this, Nick. Us criticizing this movie, it has nothing to do with criticizing a real life event for which the source material was inspired by, right? Like, because we're not making fun of the event, of course. And just to cover Alice Sebold really quickly, because there might be people listening to this who do know or don't know, Alice Sebold was writing this book. It had a different name when she was first writing it. The name The Lovely Bones didn't become the name until, I believe, it was, basically ready to be published. And then that was a title that was chosen for it. But this was a thing she was writing, years before it got published. And then she couldn't figure out how to crack it. So she went and wrote her memoir, a book called Lucky, which was about that incident, right? The terrible incident happened to her in college, and it was called Lucky because that's what one of the police officers said to her. You're lucky to be alive, basically, and like it stuck with her. Now, there's some controversy around Alice Sebold. I just want to say that book didn't name the perpetrator, but there was a case. There was somebody that she accused, and then a couple of years ago, that person was exonerated. Basically, that he was falsely accused of what happened. And there's a lot going on. It's not like a thing where Alice Sebold like sought out this person and persecuted them. The cops were very much like, they pointed her towards this person, even though she identified a different person in the lineup originally. They kind of like goaded her and convinced her to change what she was saying. Now, obviously, she has a big personal responsibility in this, of course, and her apology was kind of lackluster when she apologized. But I just want to bring that stuff up because it is part of the story of this whole thing, because obviously, like you said, this is based on something that actually happened to her, and there is no doubt what happened to her, right? So I want to make sure that that's clear in this discussion. And then there is the aspect that, and one of the crazy things is that they were making a movie out of Lucky, and it was one of the producers of that movie, when they were like kind of breaking the script, was like, some of this stuff doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up like with what's going on, and that sort of like led to things getting opened up a little bit more with that. But she wrote a follow-up to this book, I believe in like 2006, 2007, I believe it was, called The Almost Moon, and that was it was mixed to negatively received. I read it at the time when it was published and thought it was just kind of bad. And she hasn't written a single thing since then. So, like, published a single thing since then. So she's a very interesting author, very interesting story, because this book was so popular. People who are younger than us, I don't know if people realize, they won't realize this. I mean, this book was huge, like crazy huge. It was everywhere, right? And it kind of came out of nowhere as well. So that was a big part of it as well. So yeah, I read this book, before the movie came out, well, a couple years before the movie came out. So, but when the movie came out, very fresh in my mind, right? What this book was, all the ins and outs of it. I was really taken with the book. So I was really looking forward to this. And when I saw it, I was like everybody else, pretty much disappointed in what I saw, right? And I would say watching it this time, I don't think my feelings have changed too much, though I do feel like because of the way we're watching the movies for this show, there are a couple of things I'm going to point out that I think are well done and are well executed, right? And are interesting ideas for how to bring this story to conception. But my general feelings are really it's mostly a failure of adapting this book into a movie, with the caveat that books like this are often turned into bad movies, because this book is really like, a contemplative reckoning with, trauma and mortality, and is very ethereal and esoteric at times. And, it is very much about like the main character sitting in her heaven, like thinking about things for long periods of time. And that's just not things that you can really do in a movie. So the movie ends up being much more of like a mystery thriller than it does, which is a part of the book. Don't get me wrong, it's a spine of the book, but there's so much other stuff in the book that it's not the main focus. It's like, it's one of those things when you're reading it where you're like, wow, there's like a little mystery pot boiler thing stuck into the middle of this, like really, sort of, melancholy, heady kind of, book about these big concepts. Right.
Well, and about the afterlife, right? Like this is genre wise, this is a little bit like What Dreams May Come type movie, where it is envisioning it's not exactly heaven. Peter Jackson has kind of explicitly said what we're seeing here is the in between. It's like a purgatorial state between real life and between,
which is that way in the book too.
The eternal, which is an interesting idea. I have to say, let me lay my cards on the table here too.
Go ahead,
because I saw this when it came out and remember being mildly disappointed with it. I hadn't read the book, so I didn't know, whether it was a problem with the adaptation or whatever. I'd say this movie, I kind of split this into thirds, right? Like I'd say about a third of it is genuinely good. Mm-hmm. About a third of it is, questionable choices, but it's not cringe and terrible. And the other third of it is just, oh my God, what are you thinking? Run for the hills, bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, maybe that evens out and it all just ends up as like a 5 out of 10.
That's kind of where I'm at with it. Yeah.
Like it's not the worst movie I've ever seen, but the bad parts really pissed me off. The good parts really impressed me. And the majority, the stuff in between is just kind of.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So, I mean, let's start with, some of the biggest.
Let me actually just say one other thing that kind of struck me watching this time. This had to be a hard adaptation for anybody, right? Like
yes.
I would have liked to have seen Lynn Ramsey's film because she is, in some sense, a more serious, less mainstream kind of filmmaker. She's a woman. Mm-hmm. I think two of the writers of this, it's Jackson and a friend Walsh and Philippa Boyens, who are his usual collaborators. So it's not necessarily that there was no women involved in the making of this movie. But I think, a female director might have made more sense for this project. But also, the tone of this is so hard to pull off, right? Like it's a story about a young girl who is brutally attacked and killed, and she dies very early on in the story. It is an afterlife story where we're seeing the world from her perspective as a dead person, recently dead person. It is also a mystery thriller where we know who the killer is right away. Mm-hmm. Not that there would be any question. If this character was in any movie, you'd be like, that guy's the killer.
Yeah.
We have a lot to talk about with that performance, but there's not a whole lot of tension there because the victim is already dead and the murderer is already identified, so it's very hard. I mean, they try to do some stuff later on that I think doesn't really work at all to kind of ratchet up the excitement of that part of it. And I think it's very hard to make a movie like it's the tonal balance, and you can speak more to this obviously than I can, but like there's this schmaltzy side, this chicken soup for the soul sort of aspect to what's going on in the afterlife here, with some really genuinely traumatic, horrifying stuff that was toned down a lot for this movie. I mean, this movie was definitely... This is like your quintessential PG-13 movie, right? Like where there are adult themes and adult ideas, but for the most part, it's a lot of ellipses, which I don't mind, right? Like I don't want to see the assault and the murder in this in a graphic way, but it's almost elided so much that it like barely even registers, and so we get this, it's trying to sort of have its cake and eat it too, right? Like where it's trying to do this feel good sort of, the meaning of life sort of thing alongside this much grittier, darker, and as you said with the book, kind of a very darkly hued story about horrible people doing horrible things to innocent people. This was going to be hard no matter who did it. And I think that's worth at least noting. Like, I think the one place where I disagree with Roger Ebert, like he puts so much blame for, like, he basically says everyone here is doing a good job except for Peter Jackson, and Peter Jackson's just blowing it every step of the way. I don't know that that's true, or even if it is that true, I think Peter Jackson's intentions were good. And I think he really, he said it, talking about this film when he was developing it. He said he saw a Sebold story as eternal, optimistic, as much as it was a dark story and was based on a terrible experience in her own life, he kind of saw the optimistic side, or the humanistic side of it more than maybe a Lynn Ramsey would have. And I give him credit for trying. I just don't think he succeeded. But, it would have been tough for anybody to sort of thread that needle to get both the darkness of this story and that sort of uplifting, optimistic side of it to work in the same movie. He throws in some other stuff that just, is mind-boggling, which we'll talk about. But I think it just would have been a very fine line to walk for any filmmaker. Yeah,
and absolutely. And here's what I'll say. I think a lot of the stuff you're going to bring up that you're like, I can't believe this is in the movie, is stuff that's in the book. You know what I mean? Like the book is, like you said, a very hard tightrope to walk, because it is at the end, a positive, it is a positive looking story, right? It is about someone coming to terms with, their trauma and how to move forward and how to let the people in their life move forward, and not keep them also chained to this trauma that they themselves experienced, right? Obviously, we're dealing with the most elevated version you can, where you have the person is dead, all right? But I think that, it's incredibly hard, right? Which is why I think someone who would have pushed a little bit more towards the darker stuff, I think could have made the more whimsical stuff work in comparison, because it wouldn't be so far to the whimsy side where it was where Jackson goes. Honestly, Heavenly Creatures Jackson would have been the right person to make this movie, right? Because like when we talked about that movie, it's whimsical at times and also really dark and biting at times as well. And that's about a real story, right? This is based off a book, so you have more freedom for it to be, dark and dirty and mean, because it's based on a book, right? It's not based on a real story. So you're not sort of profiting off of and sensationalizing a real story. I think that, like, Jackson makes some bad choices here, mostly with the visual storytelling that he does in the sort of like in-between world. I think that stuff is really bad. A lot of it. And there's other bad choices too, but a lot of that is because you're taking a book, and he's incredibly faithful when the stuff appears in the movie, but the choices of what to remove from the story in order to make it fit into a 2-hour-long movie really just destroy what the actual story is about and what makes it powerful. And that stuff just gets lost here. It just is lost here, and that's a real problem, right? And you have to lay that at the feet of the people who adapted it, right? We don't know any other conversations that are happening at this moment, right? About like, no, Peter, you have to make it. We want this to be a movie that could make some money and attract people to this and be one of those movies that like seems dark but it's uplifting. And so you gotta do this, you gotta cut this, you gotta cut that. We don't know those conversations. I'm not gonna try to guess what those conversations are, right? But what is there is a failure of adaptation to take what this book is, what the book is meaning and what it is saying, and bringing that to film. And I don't care if you change everything, as long as it still delivers the feeling and the sense of what the book does, and this does not.
It does. I mean, those themes are there, right? Like it's not that it completely misses the point, I don't think. I mean, and again, because I haven't read it, I can't say that for sure. But like everything you were just saying about what makes the book good and interesting and what the book is actually trying to say, that's expressed in this movie. I wouldn't say it's expressed particularly well, some of it, but it's not like they went off in a completely different direction. It's not like he read this story and completely misinterpreted it. I just think it would have been a very hard thing to do. And yeah, it needed, this script is terrible. I think that's one of the weakest things about it. The dialogue is some of it's just atrocious. And we know these writers are brilliant writers, right? I mean, they adapted a much, much harder, well, I don't know about harder, but I mean, Tolkien is so much bigger and more expansive. And the relationships between fantasy creatures in the Lord of the Rings trilogy are so much more humanistic than the human relations in this movie, which feel very kind of soap operatic at times. And I don't understand that. Like that sensitivity that I felt throughout all of the, the love and friendship stuff in the Lord of the Rings, which is such a big part of those movies. I don't get any of that here, and this movie is touching on like some real universal things, young love and families and familiar relationships and all that. And like, the fact that none of that really rings true for me here really hurts. And I think it's a failure in some cases of casting. Much of that you got to lay at the hands of the script here, because it is just, it's pretty bad at times.
I mean, the problem is you're speed running those themes. And that's the problem in this movie is like, again, I don't want to see a 3-hour version of whatever this was, right? But the good version of this is unfortunately a 2.5 hour or 3 hour long, like, movie, right? It's really tough to fit this in, because then it just becomes a thriller, basically, is what you turn it into when you make it into this length of movie. Because it ends up being, a little under 2 hours, without credits,
There's a lot of credits at the end of this movie. Yeah. So I believe it's a 2 hour, 15-minute runtime, and it's 15 minutes of credits.
Yeah. It's like 159 or something without the credits. So
there's bad CGI that they had to credit all the
they had a lot of stuff. Yeah. It's not, the thing is, like, here's the thing. It's not even bad CGI. It's bad compositing is what it is. Because the actual like backdrops and things that are happening look great, but
some of them do.
When you put her into them, it looks bad. But let's not fast forward. I think I want to start diagnosing a little bit about the problems with this. And I think not performance wise, but we start with our main character, right? Suzy Salmon, played by, this is our third time talking about Saoirse Ronan. This is a fine performance from her. There is nothing wrong with her performance at all in this movie. The problem is the central conceit of the character, which is in a book works unbelievably well, right? Because she ends up being the narrator for the whole book. You end up really, really being inside her head and understanding how she's feeling and how the things that she's perceiving and feeling affect the living world and also affect her world. And most of that is lost here for the most part. And she just ends up being someone who's like sitting in like a CG gazebo, like crying a lot, right? This ends up happening a lot in this movie to her.
That is a big portion of this movie. I had a lot of voiceover, a lot of voiceover, disembodied voiceover.
Yeah.
Obviously, is narration is a thing that's going to work better in a book that's first person. Here, it gets to be a little bit much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it also, I mean, and you tell me, because you've read it, like, I don't think, these Afterlife movies, right? You have to be very careful about the relationship between the present world, the living world, and the world of the dead. Like, there has to be some rules. There has to be, like, the metaphysics have to make sense. Got it on the third try. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
We're going to have to go for 4. I don't feel like they do it all here. Like, I think it plays very fast and loose with how much Suzy can actually affect what's going on in the world of the living. And we see it in so many different ways that don't seem to match up together. And I think that's a problem too. I think of a movie, and it's been a very long time since I've seen it, but the movie Ghost, right? It's kind of one of the quintessential examples of that. And whatever you think of that movie, I think it does a pretty good job of making the connections clear between what someone who is not alive and what that person, that dead person, can do to affect the living characters in that movie. I feel like What Dreams May Come, which is another one, maybe that movie's terrible, but I remember really liking it when I was in sophomore year of high school. I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen it, maybe even since then.
Yeah.
But I feel like that movie did a pretty good job of that also. This one is just, it kind of doesn't care. And not that I need the Beetlejuice guide to the afterlife in this.
Yeah.
We don't need to spell that out, but we also need to be at least somewhat consistent about it. And I feel like this movie just doesn't take the time or have the care to do that.
So what you're saying is very interesting because it is, I think, points to another problem with the adaptation of the material, which is the other movie you talked about, Ghost, right, is a rocks in its brains thriller, right? That's what it is, right? It's a fantastically entertaining movie, but it doesn't have a smart thought in its head, but is a fun movie that is about its rules and its plot and its mystery, right? And what happens to this movie, because it, like I said, it shaves itself down to be so much about that stuff, you asking these questions becomes more important because it becomes like a thing that becomes very central to every aspect of the dueling storylines, right? Where the book itself, and I don't want to spend the whole time just talking about the way the book is different than the movie, right? But I'll say this. The thing about the book is her whole purpose in the in-between in the book is not just to interact with the people who are still alive from her family, right? That is part of it, but there's also a part of that that's like her letting go and her basically, she has a little bit of that, like, 5 people you meet in heaven thing where, like, she sees her grandparent who had passed away. She gets to, like, see her dog who had passed away. There's like this, like, very emotional thing that's happening to her over there while this other stuff is going on. And there's a lot of, like, more, I don't know, Terrence Malick-y, like, time slipping, right? Where it's like she stops paying attention and all of a sudden, X amount of time has gone by, right? In the real world, in the living world and stuff like that. There's a lot more of that going on in the book. There's a lot more of that sort of like, these two things are important in their own rights for different reasons, than they make it out into the movie. And also a big part of the sort of story and concept of the book is that, and they kind of go into this in the movie, but like her refusing to let herself move on to whatever the next thing is also stops her family from being able to move on from her, right? So they don't do a lot of that in the movie. Like they kind of hint at it a little bit, but that's
another thing that's here that's just not articulated.
It's not articulated well at all, and it's such a important aspect of what the story is about that's why I say, like, they just missed these core, like, concepts and themes, or really, explaining these themes a little bit more or fleshing out these themes a little bit more, that they just sort of like throw out for a moment in the movie and then they're moving on to what's Mr. Harvey doing, in his basement or whatever, which is a big part of the book, but it's not the central stuff of the book, right? There's also so much more, obviously, with the mom and the dad and like what their relationship is like and why it falls apart. The sister is like such a major character in the book, and she's a major character here, but just like every other character, it just feels like, she's got a couple of minutes to go through every single emotion that she could possibly go through in her entire life. And
pushes the plot forward. She does some action movie stuff. Yeah. She sneaks into his house.
Yeah, which is a big part, again, of the book, but it's like that's one part of the book with all this other great stuff that's going on. And this movie really doesn't get those things. And also, by being so flowery a lot of the time, I think it robs itself of the punch you could get from something like this, right? This this moment of, of realization, right, from her about letting go doesn't even feel really like a realization in the movie, because everything has been so beautiful and wonderful for her. It's like, well, okay, but
yeah, why not just stay there?
Yeah, like, so there's a lot of that going on, right? And I think it just misses the mark a lot in those places.
I can't believe this script passed up the chance to have her meet her dead dog in heaven or whatever, because this movie is very schmaltzy, and I feel
they
like
got rid of all of that stuff. They got rid of all of her meeting anybody who didn't have anything directly to do with the murder which is a shame because like I can remember, like this is one of the things, you have those memories of like when something really like affects you. I remember I was doing an internship at ABC News at the time when I was reading this book. And on my lunch break, I went out to Central Park in New York City and I was reading this book in Central Park on my lunch break. And that part happened with the dog. And I remember sitting in Central Park weeping, reading this thing, and like that stuff was so affecting and so wonderful. Right. And like you said, like these are things you could do in a movie pretty easily. Right. And I think they just missed a lot of those points. And what ends up happening is you're going to have to rely so much more on just the living world stuff. And it's just not as propulsive or interesting as the stuff that you could be doing with Suzy as the main character in what she's going through.
I mean, you're talking about all these things and it's thinking back to this movie, right? Like everything here, as hard as it is to nail this tone, there's so many sympathetic, empathetic things in this story, right? Like this is the story about a young person whose life is cut, tragically short. It's a story about a family, a nice, decent, well-meaning family who is grieving for their lost daughter. I mean, that should all be a slam dunk, right? Like, this movie should make people cry. There wasn't a second in this movie where I felt like emotionally like bowled over. And like, that's what this story I feel like needs to do. And it almost doesn't even try. There's nothing affecting in this movie, and literally the elements are all there to do something that's just, a total heartbreaker. And even if it was as schmaltzy as it is, but it kind of just pushed a little farther in that direction, I'm not a heartless bastard. This movie probably would have made me cry, but it almost pulls back every time it tries to go in that direction. And I just don't, it just doesn't make sense to me, the choices that led to this being what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. The stuff with the family, like, they do it. And again, this thing where I do have to just ding old Petey boy about stuff like this, which is that like a main tenet of the mom character is that she wanted to have a certain life. And because of the family and everything, she had to kind of give up that life. And she spends a lot of her time sort of still wishing she was in that life. The only evidence of it is like she's reading like Camus at the beginning, and then it cuts. And now she's reading like What to Expect When You're Expecting, and I'm like, Pete, this is like the book version of like, oh, I'm having money trouble, so I have like a late power bill on my desk, or whatever. Like, well,
it's the person who coughs and there's a little blood on the handkerchief, and that person's going to die 2 scenes later. Yeah. It's a shorthand. Well, she does leave for California later, and
but in the book she has like an affair with the detective.
Yeah, which would have been interesting here because the detective's played by the great Michael Imperioli, who's completely wasted in this movie.
Yeah, it definitely. Again, this feels to me like there was more and it got cut down. That's what it feels like to me, because of the actors who have been cast in the roles and how small the roles end up being. You know what I mean? So, I mean, a big thing about this movie, right, is that the original person cast as the dad was Ryan Gosling. Now, obviously, Ryan Gosling this is 2008 or 7 when he's getting cast. Young, right? He's only in his 40s now, right? So he's
mid-20s back then, yeah.
He's mid-20s back then. So obviously, usually not old enough to have a 14-year-old daughter, not really old enough to be married to Rachel Weisz. So, and I think
a little too good looking to play that much older. I mean, it's been done before, like Orson Welles could do it, but Gosling looks mid-20s at this point.
It's smolderingly handsome as well. There's not any hiding it. But
Mark Wahlberg's a good-looking guy too.
Yeah, but not as good looking as Ryan Gosling. Let's be serious.
Yeah.
So Gosling at the time, right? We're in this era of Gosling where he is really trying to be taken seriously as an actor, right? He's still in his head, I think, about like, I look like this. I've got to make sure everyone knows though, but I'm serious about being an actor. He has a lot of serious roles. He has a lot of like, I'm a drug addict. I'm a whatever. Like these are big, all around this time, right? For this, he's in his own head about being too young, so he gains a bunch of weight to do it. And Peter Jackson is like, no, like this is not what I want. He's not supposed to be like this, like, overweight, schlubby dad. Like he's supposed to be like you're supposed to feel like he has this presence, right? So they have a big disagreement, and Gosling gets fired basically the day that production is supposed to start, essentially. And they bring in Mark Wahlberg. Now, at the time when I saw this movie, I was very hard on Wahlberg's performance in it. Watching it this time, I don't think he's certainly not doing anything terrible. This is not a terrible Mark Wahlberg performance. This is not the happening Mark Wahlberg performance. It's not a, hey, what are you doing there, lady? Like, it's not that kind of performance.
What?
But,
no.
What? No. Say hello to your mother for me.
See, I feel like there's a little bit of that in this movie. He's Wahlberging pretty hard in scenes here. Yeah, but
the best roles are, he's only good in roles in which they take that and make it like 1,000,000% and really work for the movie. Yeah. But I will say this, I don't think he's bad in this, but he is not up to the task of playing this character. There are several key scenes that he just cannot pull off, like especially the scene where he like realizes, he gets the realization that Harvey is the one who did it. Like, I'm just like, you just look as angry as you did 3 seconds ago. I see no thinking behind your eyes, right? That's not Wahlberg's, strong suit on camera. Like, this is not me saying he's a dumb guy in real life. You're talking about the scene where
they're building the duck blind in his backyard?
Yes.
That scene is like incomprehensible. It's poorly written. It's poorly acted. It doesn't make any sense. How he even comes to that realization is kind of just not really dealt with at all. The way he doesn't react to him in that scene is a weird directorial and performance choice there. Like, that should be a big moment in this movie, and it's just baffling. It's terrible.
And that's what I mean. Wahlberg's not up to.
Yeah,
he can't.
But it's not entirely his fault in that. moment.
No.
There's some pretty bad stuff in that moment anyway.
But Gosling is a good enough actor.
He might have been able to
sell you on something that is not all the way there in the script. Wahlberg is just not that kind of actor. He can't do it. It's just not his. It's just
and
not
the
his
script
forte.
is doing him no favors.
No,
there's a moment early on, but before Suzy is killed, like this, what should be a very lovely father-daughter moment, and he's just Wahlberging so hard in this scene.
Oh yeah,
like,
I know.
I am very sensitive to father-daughter stuff, obviously. Like, I thought seeing this movie this time, I was going to be like, I'll be able to get over the stupidity and schmaltiness of it because now I have a kid and like this is going to resonate more with me. And the fact that it still didn't tells you this movie's probably not a very good movie.
Yeah,
like,
I agreed.
This movie kind of had me in it's at the palm of its hand, or should have, and it definitely didn't. That moment where they're working on the ship in the bottle together, and he's it might as well be something out of The Happening, because he played a dad in that movie too. And,
he did. He definitely
that was
played a dad.
Just a year before this.
Again, I don't buy for a second that Mark Wahlberg builds little model ships and puts them in a thing. Like, again, just not the
Mark
right.
Wahlberg as an accountant. Yeah,
just not the right guy. And again, I will just say this. It's one of those things where you just like, you're watching him play against this actual, 14-year-old actress. And she is just like running circles around him because in her eyes, I buy everything on her end of it, right? Like her reactions, her like whatever. I think she's great. So he's a problem in the movie, but not because he is, in my opinion, overtly bad. He's just not up to the task. Like you said, the script is not all there. And so you need an actor who's able to elevate that material. That's not Wahlberg's deal. He doesn't do that.
And even Saoirse Ronan, who is great, and we've talked about how great she is before, she's really underserved by the dialogue here. But she says some things in this movie that are like, even her as 14 years old, she's probably like, don't we want to punch this line up a little bit, probably? Peter, Fran, Philippa, can we give me something here? Because, the moments where she's not believable are those moments. Where she is believable, the quiet moments. Yeah. Like when she's thinking about whether she should try to escape this horribly creepy man who's trapped her in a hole in the ground. Yeah. Those moments work. And she's great in those. But this dialogue is pretty tough. Yeah.
I don't know. We never talked about Rachel Weisz before, right? We've never done Rachel Weisz.
I don't think so. Surprisingly. Movie? Yeah, I love Rachel Weisz.
Love her. Had a crush on her for forever.
How could you not? Yeah. This is a couple years after The Fountain, a movie I love very much.
To me, one of the prettiest ladies. Like I just think she's great.
To the world, one of the prettiest ladies.
Yeah. And again, very underserved in this. Like all of the interiority, all the stuff that could be part of this character. If this movie is made a different way, if it's if that stuff is given the attention it deserves, isn't there. She mostly just yells a little bit, disappears, and then comes back, right? That's really all that happens. There isn't much more for her to do here than that. Rose McIver, it plays the Lindsay Salmon, the younger sister. Yeah, she would go on to, be on that show iZombie a couple years later, where she's very good on that show. She's been in a bunch of stuff over the years. I also think that she does what she can with what is here for her, and I think she has a couple of very good moments in this, but again, you end up having these characters that really only have one sort of note to play, right? She only really gets to be kind of angry this whole movie, and that's it, right? That's all you really get from her.
Barely see her until she needs to serve a role in the plot, like 2/3 of the way through the movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
She becomes our surrogate Suzy at that point.
Like you said, Michael Imperioli doesn't get a lot to do here. He's good in the scenes that he's in. That
70s hairstyle works pretty good for him.
It works great for him.
I got to say, the costume design here, the fashions, the production design, I mean, it looks very, I wasn't around in, 73? But, like pictures of my parents who were like, just graduating high school around that time, like, the clothing and the posters on the wall and everything seems like very accurate, the cars and everything. I did like that aspect about it. I guess if I have to pick between the real world of the Lovely Bones and the in-between, I think I like the real world stuff better. None of it works, but that works a lot better for me. There are moments of it that are believable and are interesting, and I don't know if any of the metaphysical stuff does.
The living world, like the way it looks great. It's a great looking movie
mall,
when you're in the living world. Yes,
very quintessentially, small town 70s locations. I like all that stuff.
Yeah, me too. I think all that stuff looks really nice.
Rooms.
The living rooms. I think even, we'll talk about the way it functions, but like even like his room with the ships and like the candle on the thing, it all looks really nice. And I think that stuff is shot very well. Obviously we have the two other sort of like teen characters. One is like the kiss that Suzy Salmon never got to have. And one is like, of course, the like kind of the dark haired girl who can see ghosts, so we'll leave that stuff to the side for right now because we'll get to that part of the movie. But I mean, the real elephant in the room here, right, is Stanley Tucci as Mr. Harvey.
Stanley Tucci, made up to be Bob Odenkirk, playing the killer in this film. So
it's obviously it's a lot of acting, right? It's a big performance, even though a lot of it is done in a very kind of like a contained way. But it is There's doing a lot of stuff, right? There's a hair, there's the eyes, there's like the way he talks, the way he moves, all this stuff is very considered. And I think like, taken in a vacuum, I think it is a good performance, right? But I think that put into the soup of this movie, and you can see why it was, I guess, lauded at the time, right? But put in the soup of this movie.
Well, he's playing way against type, and
yes,
he is committed to doing the thing that he's doing. I actually don't like this performance at all, and I love Stanley Tucci. I think he's great. There is not a second of this where that character, as I was saying before, right? There should be a little bit of nuance to this. He is just serial killer psychopath. Every interaction that he is involved in here, every movement he makes, every look, every word he says to another character, he's just creepy as fuck. And I understand that this character is supposed to be that, but like, it's not, it feels a little cartoonish to me. It is, as I said, it's an actor who is generally very, very likable in roles, and he's playing way against type. And I know that's the kind of thing that gets award attention all the time, but I really don't like this performance. There's not a thing about it. It doesn't impress me. He supposedly, he kind of had to be talked into it because he is such a likable guy and mostly plays likable characters, and kind of wanted to stretch out acting wise a little bit, but didn't want to do anything too horrific on screen. I respect him for that because it is kind of a tough role to have to play, a tough story to have to be involved in. He supposedly based his performance on I think it's, forgive me, I don't know as much about serial killers as I should, but I think it's the BTK guy, the one who was like this suburban kind of pillar of the community and had this secret life where he was just murdering people. But like, I guess I believe the murderous side of George Harvey, but like the pillar of the community, normal person, guy in your neighborhood who you wouldn't suspect of being a murderer. I don't think he sells that at all. I would move if that guy lived across from me.
Yeah, right.
I'd be gone. And like,
I mean, it's a problem with the movie too, which is that they do not give you any lens of him.
Right. Yeah.
Where he would be doing that stuff, right?
Where he's supposed to be just walking in the mall or talking to his neighbors about, their plants and stuff like that. It's like, that guy is terrifying. Don't you see that? And nobody seems to.
Yeah. But even when he's talking to his neighbors, he's in the midst of stalking, Suzy, basically. So you never give him, a time for Tucci to kind of be normal-ish. Not a subtle performance. It doesn't have a lot of levels, like you said. But I do, there is some part of me that is impressed by the commitment, to what he's going for, right? I think that
when the movie calls for him to be creepy, he certainly lives up to the task, right? I mean, he's Freddy Krueger or something.
Yeah.
Like if that was all this character had to be, I think it would work, but he's not. I mean, the story doesn't work if he's just that, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is definitely a mechanic of the book is that it has to be believable as like a normal person, right? The fact that like people like Lindsay and the father see the darkness is different, right? Is not something that everybody sees, and that's the kind of an important part of the story. Which obviously, like you said, you see that guy. It's kind of like when you see Jack Nicholson at the beginning of The Shining, and you're like, this guy's gonna go crazy and try to kill you. Like, there's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, he's like this close.
Yeah, he's this close already. This is not like, oh, he's just a normal guy who, what happened to him? Like, like
that damn hotel. Yeah, only they hadn't gone to the hotel. Yeah.
He would have killed them a couple of years later or something. Like that's what it feels like with him. So I know I totally agree with you there. But Tucci, obviously he gets nominated for an Oscar for this. He said like, and not in a way that it's like, oh, because he thinks his performance was bad or he hated doing it. He said like, I would never do that again, just because it was so difficult to do it. It took a lot out of you. It was really dark. And I don't want to do that again. Basically, is what he has said about this movie. It's one of the things he said about the movie. So yeah, so the basic idea of the movie, right, is that Suzy is this 14-year-old girl. She is finding her first crush, gonna have her first kiss, and one day she's walking home alone after film club through a cornfield, and this serial killer tricks her into this underground sort of clubhouse thing he's built. And he rapes and murders her there, and the movie is then split between her in this in-between, this place that in the world of this book and this movie, people go while they're letting go of life before they move on to the next bit, and then the grieving family that's left behind when she dies, and how it's very much a story, or it's supposed to be a story about, how people grieve and how people learn to let go, and the things that grief and trauma can do to us and what they can drive us to do, right? That is like what most of this, story is about.
And the desire for vengeance versus the desire to move on, or the need to move on.
Yes. Yeah, it is about that, though I feel like
one of the interesting things this movie does is it kind of, particularly with the way it ends, the audience is kind of implicated in that also. Yeah. Because Harvey is exactly as we were just saying he is, and I think we want to see some justice happen to him, whether it be karmic or, something a little bit more physical. Mm-hmm. Something that one of these characters finds him out and they catch him and they kill him, or they arrest him or something like that. And the fact that the movie denies us that is a very gutsy choice, which I assume is taken from the book also, although even that's kind of undercut by the fact that Peter Jackson reshot his death late in the movie to make it more violent for
but I mean, the way he dies in the movie is basically the way he dies in the book. They just show like him tumbling and breaking his neck in half. We get a little more
crunchy bone breaking stuff there.
But the way he dies is exactly how he dies in the book. And this is why I want to say too, what I mean about the book being a little bit mean and it is not about, oh, you should just let this go. Like that is not like when it comes to Harvey, like that is not what this is about at all. Like the book is very much, and the author's perspective is very much on the tip of this man deserves what is coming to him and he will get it. Like
as
not.
It should be. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm just saying, like, so this is not a story about like, oh, you should just let it go. Like, that's not like what it's about, really.
Well, the movie's about that.
Yeah, the movie is sort of about that for sure. It's much more about, it's supposed to be about coming to grips with what happened and not turning away from it, but not letting it consume and be everything that defines your life, right?
I don't know how quickly you want to go through this.
Yeah.
We're kind of, the murder happens about a half hour into the movie, about a quarter of the way through the running time. It's kind of 3-act structure. It's inciting incident. It's the first act turn to the second act kind of moment. I actually kind of like the first half hour of this movie.
Yeah,
like I don't feel like there's at the very early scene, we see Suzy as like a 2-year-old, just kind of in her house. She sees this little penguin in a snow globe, which kind of informs some of the CGI stuff that happens later in the in-between. I kind of like that stuff.
He's okay. It's my more one.
No, it's pretty good. That's very close, very accurate to what we see in those scenes. But you get that great production design. There's some nice kind of family moments there. I like Suzy as a character. This thing, she gets a camera, like a Kodak camera with the little flash thing like they used to have, and she takes pictures of everything. And she's 14 years old. She's kind of rebellious. She wants to be an artist, she wants to be a photographer. Her dad doesn't want to develop all her, the parents have this thing about developing all her rolls of film, which, probably could have been done more elegantly later on, because that does become a major plot point here. But I like all the stuff that happens with this character there. The relationships feel somewhat believable. I mean, the dialogue's a little cheesy, but there's some fun stuff with the wacky grandma played by Susan Sarandon, who we'll talk more about later. That's another baffling choice the movie makes later on. But, I think up until Suzy dies, and there's a little Owl Creek Bridge thing where looks like she gets away from Harvey and she doesn't. That's a nice way of kind of not showing us the really horrible stuff. We get a good sense of exactly what it would have been. And, I kind of laud Jackson for that choice. But there's some good filmmaking. There's some really, really nice scenes here. And even when she gets to that cornfield, there's this wonderful overhead shot, this very high angle kind of looking down at the two of them making their way across the cornfield. And it looks great. The dread and the ominousness is there. Of course, we are on Suzy's side, I think, right from the beginning. And, you introduce a character as an adorable 2-year-old, and like it really helps you, feel sympathetic and want to root for that character. And this movie does a pretty good job of that. I mean, Suzy is certainly likable. I don't love all the stuff that happens when she's in the in-between, but up till this point, when she's just a regular suburban preteen girl, she's sympathetic, she's fun, she's charismatic and energetic. And, I don't really have any problem with the first half hour of this movie. Like, I think that could have led to a better rest of the movie. But, right up until the murders, even that moment when it's the two of them together in the clubhouse, whatever.
Really scary, really tense. Like, that stuff is really good. Absolutely. I think
I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention that. I mean, I know we have other stuff to talk about later on, but I will say, it's not just that I said a third of this movie is good. It's not just that, but I'd say a lot of that third of it that I like is the early stuff, the early goings. It doesn't really bother me until later. There's nothing in that first half hour where I'm like, ooh, this is terrible and is going to get worse.
Well, because at this point, right, what I really like about the opening stuff is that you mentioned the film thing, right? And the developing of the film, and you can only do one roll a month because of how much it costs and all that stuff. I think that stuff is really good detail, hyper-specific, so it is relatable sort of family dynamic, right? Which is there's this very specific thing, and it's also a very smart little plot character thing, because then later you should have a big deal as he develops all of the film and everything like that. It should be milestone markers or something like that. But even regardless of how they don't really pay it off in the way that you should, at the end or in the second half of the movie, I think that, like I said, it's a really good detail, right? And it also gives her a chance to be rebellious, like you said. And she goes art is outlawed in this family or whatever she says, which is such a teenager thing to say. I love that she goes to this film club and she's got this, when she's talking to her friend, she's all sort of dismissive of the movie. But then when she's talking to the artsy crush of hers, Ray, she's all into the movie and, whatever. And I buy all that stuff. And I like that it sets up this, thing that she's supposed to do, right? She's supposed to have a kiss with this guy, her first kiss. Now, again, I don't think the movie is able to really pay off the emotion of that in a good way,
No, because the way he pines for her too after she's killed, these two barely know each other. Like, I feel like the conversation that they have in that first third of the movie is the only time that they've ever really talked. So
yeah, but when you're a teenager, that doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? I think like that is fine. For me, it's like he drops out of the movie for most of the middle of the movie and then just comes back in at the end. They kind of don't know what to do with him, because they drop.
Well, maybe that's kind of what I'm saying. Yeah,
yeah, they drop this whole idea of
his obsession with her it doesn't play because we don't get a sense of where he's at over the year or so in between. I mean, this takes place over a fairly long amount of time.
It does, yeah. And I think, again, not to keep everything in the book, but like in the book, he's a suspect for a little while, obviously, because they were supposed to meet. He's like the boyfriend, all this kind of thing. That would have given them something to do for that middle part of the movie.
Not even brought up in the movie.
It's not even brought up.
I'm just thinking of it right now. Like, yeah, I probably would have questioned that guy. Not because he's creepy, but because literally he was supposed to, well, yeah.
And this whole idea, too, of like, you have this kind of relationship that buds up between the sort of weirdo girl and him. But, you don't play any of we both feel like we're betraying Suzy, like this isn't right. There's stuff you can do with those characters to make them more interesting, to make them part of the idea, to really, once again, to have it be more than just two characters. So, because what the real problem with this movie is that it's when you look at the plot of the movie, it's about two characters figuring something out that we've known since the minute 20 of the movie, right? And there's nothing narratively satisfying about that. Like, we know, like...
No, we're just waiting for it to happen the whole time.
Yeah,
we're waiting for... And like I said, the way it happens, so that, part of it is developing the film. That's a nice little plot device. I think it's great to, as you said, it kind of gives Suzy like a thing that she does, and she, it suggests to us that she is a thoughtful person, so that when she is in that sort of realm between the real world and heaven or whatever it is, she would have philosophical and sort of deep thoughts the way she does. But Wahlberg develops the film, one particular roll of film, and there's a shot in there where we actually see Harvey, but there's also a shot in there of a golden retriever, and it's like, he immediately suspects after seeing that photo that Harvey is a killer. It's like, well, the dog is in there too. Maybe the golden retriever killed her, right? Yeah. Like, it's like the way the movie plays it, it's like one of those, like it's a touchstone to the whole thing, and how could it be, right? She took pictures of everybody, and he's not even looking. He's like barely visible in the shot.
Yeah.
But for some reason, that's enough for her dad to be like, oh, that's the guy.
Yeah, exactly. And, there are just more interesting themes and stuff that could have been brought to bear here. Like you mentioned, the problem with the Tucci performance is like, he's just straight up a monster, right? And kind of the whole point is that it isn't that he's a monster, it's that he's a man, right? And like that is scarier than him being a monster. Is he's just seems like a regular guy who does this horrible stuff. But like you said, there's no point in the movie where he seems like a regular guy. He just always seems like, no, you look like the kind of person who would do this. Like that like what you feel the whole time you're looking at him.
And movies that are thrillers, right? The character that is that weird and off-putting usually turns out to not be the killer because it's too obvious, right? Yeah. Like, he's the red herring. He's the bearded guy in Home Alone who ends up being like the most wonderful person in the world, even though he's pretty creepy through most of the movie. That movie gets that right. This one, I mean, I understand it's a very different kind of story, but there's just never any sense. Like, I know we're supposed to hate him, and we certainly do, but the fact that no one sees him for what he is, it just doesn't play at all.
Yeah, and it also doesn't help the way that Suzy sees him in these, like, when she's in the in-between. Again, I think of the in-between stuff, the stuff with Harvey, her perception of him is, I think, the most well-staged and most effective parts of it. Yeah. It's good.
There's a moment where it reminds me a lot of a film that I really love, Tarsem Singh's The Cell, where she sees him in a bathtub with like a towel over his face, and it's this white, it's very... It's the hotel room from 2001 kind of. I'm just referencing other movies.
Yeah.
But it is. I mean, you can do that. It's a metaphysical realm, so it can kind of look like anything. And the set is great. The camera work in that moment, this like slow, creepy camera movement. The production design there, this bathtub that he's sitting in. There's a bloody sink. And I love that stuff. I think that works. That's definitely in the third of this movie that I think is genuinely good. Maybe a little more of that would have helped, because certainly there's no mystery to it. Certainly we know who he is, so let's play that up a little bit. It doesn't, I mean, after that, we don't get too much of that, and maybe more would be better.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of moments, right? I think like the sequence where she's seeing the other victims of his crimes, the stuff where like, and some of those things work better than others. I think some of them are really creepily or really well staged, and some of them are a little too, I think, effects heavy, but whenever she's like watching him kind of sitting in the basement, stuff like that, I think that stuff works pretty well, and I even think like when she's describing him, right, I think that's some of the best voiceover in the movie as well, because it's the one time where you feel like there's a connection between the thematic elements and the plot elements, and it's the only time where you feel that a lot of the time, because the movie decides to center so much on this. It's the only time where the movie feels like it has propulsion at all, and I think that's a big problem, right, with what the movie is doing. I think also, a big part of this story, right, is her in the in-between, and it never feels like really she's there, right? It always feels like a person on a green screen running around and then there was just stuff put in behind her, right? There's never really a physical connection between those two things, which is a big problem, right?
I agree with that. And also, there's not much for her to do there, right? Which I understand, but I mean, if you're making a movie, and this is not a contemplative movie, this is a very plot-driven movie, she's got to have, you contrive something, right? There's got to be a quest. She's got to get to this particular place in the in-between, and along the way, she has to deal with her, metaphorically, some kind of representation of her problems, but she just kind of hangs out. She meets another person who turns out to be another victim of Harvey, who kind of guides her, but she doesn't really guide her anywhere. They kind of just stay in the same place. I mean, some of them are very cool. It was my favorite thing in the movie when I saw it the first time, the moment where the ships in the bottle are getting dashed on the rocks. And I was like,
great visual.
Yeah, it doesn't look great in the sense that we get a sense that there's a physicality to it. She's actually there, but it's really cool looking, and it does really link up to the thing that happens earlier in the movie with her dad. That's his thing, and he starts smashing the bottles, and they're getting dashed up on the rock. Very Skull Island, very King Kong, which I liked. But yeah, most of what we see there, it's such obvious stuff too. It's the gazebo, it's the lighthouse, it's these, what's your immediate, what are the things that we want to do in this metaphysical afterlife realm? It's like, well, exactly this imagery, right? I don't know how you feel about the movie The Cell, but that really does feel like somebody's subconscious. That really does to me. The imagery in that movie, I think there's a cohesiveness to it, and there's a style to it that I think really works for that movie. And here it's just, pastel colored chicken soup for the soul nonsense through a lot of it.
It just it doesn't have any tactical nature to it. It doesn't feel like, I think if it had made to feel more like a dream, like dream logic stuff more often, kind of like what the ship stuff is, I think it would have worked better. But I totally agree with you. It's like really nice, like screensavers, or
it's
like
Thomas Kincaid. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Not Chicken Soup for the Soul, although same target audience. I feel like.
Yeah, or when you get like a new graphics card on your computer and you run like the graphic tests, and it does all this particle and movement stuff to make sure your graphics card is working with stuff. That's kind of
remind me a little bit of Myst. Remember Myst?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just, again, the tactility, I think, really takes away from what you're trying to show there, because you just never feel like Suzy is anywhere or is doing anything, and that's a problem, right? And I think, and doesn't help, I don't want to pick on, I think her name is Nikki Sue, who plays Holly Gully. She's terrible in this movie.
Agreed.
Like, there is no point when she's talking to Saoirse Ronan where I feel like she's saying anything that there's no reality to what she's saying. It feels like she's just kind of like saying words from a script. Like, there's no performance happening here, right?
Yeah, I agree. The line readings are pretty rough.
They're pretty rough. And this is kind of the thing you have to sell the most in the whole movie. This movie, because the movie doesn't work because this stuff doesn't work. It is the whole thing about this movie. The whole thing about the story is Suzy in this in-between. If you don't get this right, what's the point in doing the movie at all, right? And so, I would probably be more on board with this movie if all of this stuff worked and all of the real world stuff was just absolutely terrible, right? Like, if you flipped the quality of these two things, what we got going on, I think I would have been much more on board with this movie, right? Because this stuff is the stuff that you can walk away from like, well, yeah, it wasn't great, but man, they really nailed this stuff, and that stuff is really hard to do. Yeah. And they just don't in this movie at all.
I kind of feel the opposite, right? Like every time we're in the in-between, I'm like, can we go back to 70s Pennsylvania for a
that's
while?
What I mean. Flip those two feelings is what I mean. Like, I would rather be feeling we're in 70s Pennsylvania. I really wish we were back in the in-between. Like, that's the movie works better if that's the case, especially because your greatest asset is the actress who's playing the character who's in the in-between. There is just no doubt in the world that is your biggest asset, and you are squandering it, right?
No, and she really doesn't even get to play up against anybody here.
No, she doesn't.
Once she's in, I mean, aside from that character who kind of comes and goes, she's all alone. And that, not that she's not giving a good performance there, but, you know, we have an amazing cast in this movie.
Yeah.
I want to see more of her and Susan Sarandon, if we have to see more of this Susan Sarandon character, right?
Yeah. So I would say, like, that's the biggest weakness. It's also, like, again, quickly, her having someone to talk to, like, in the in-between is a huge part of the book as well. Like, a big part of the book is, like, she's telling the stories of her life and her family to someone. And that's, like, what we're seeing. And she refuses to talk about what happened to her, right? How she died. And that's sort of like, they give it in the movie by, like, oh, she's refusing to go in his house, like, in her in between. But, like, you get robbed of that power. You get robbed of a lot of the aspects of that she's still a kid, right? The whole icicle thing is because them's killing Harvey is because it's like this idea of, like, oh, you know, we always talk about, like, play that game, The Perfect Murder or whatever, and the icicle was always the weapon that you would use. Like, that's why she kills him with the icicle at the end.
Yeah, that's never brought up here.
No, but it's just like, oh, it's an icicle.
To be a cold night. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So you know, this is like, this is what I mean by just losing that stuff. Now, Susan Sarandon's character.
Wacky grandma.
One of those things where
wacky drunken grandma. This movie turns into a sitcom, like this movie about the brutal murder of a 14-year-old girl. About an hour into it, like, we get a 10-minute interlude that's like 70s sitcom. Why?
Yeah. Again, one of those things where a character that works in a book, right? Because she shows up and it's like, oh, it throws everything off at first, but then she ends up, like, being something like an anchoring force, you know, to the family, and really kind of helps the family. They don't do that in the movie, right? It's just like, she's just there kind of to be, like, to chew some scenery, to, like, do some funny stuff, to, you know, to fall asleep smoking a cigarette that a child has to catch, like, in his little, like, you know, toy or whatever.
I'm not even saying the 70s sitcom stuff doesn't work. It just doesn't work in this movie.
Exactly.
I would watch, like a 70s set comedy with her as that character, like a Boogie Nights type movie. I'd watch that. Because
Sarandon, at least, has some juice, right?
Yeah,
she's doing something in the movie. She's, you know, whether, you know, the tonal, like, weirdness about it aside, she's in there doing something, right? She's giving a performance. When she's on screen, at least you're like, I'm entertained by what I'm looking at.
Yes.
I don't, you know.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
And that, what I will say for this movie, even though I don't think it's very good, the 2 hours didn't really drag, right? I wasn't like, well, how long is this going to be?
Yeah, that's true.
I will say that for the movie.
I will say the longer we stay with Suzy in the in-between, who's our protagonist, who we should want to stay with, as we were just saying, that's when it does start to grate a little bit for me. But it moves quickly. I could see this being a much longer movie, and it certainly wouldn't have been better if it was. So I agree with you. I hit pause somewhere, you know, in the middle of this. And I said, oh, okay, this is half over. Like, I'm kind of happy that it is at this point, but it wasn't a chore to get there.
Yeah. So, you know, about, like, I guess a little more than halfway through the movie, Suzy sort of lets us in on the idea that Harvey is sort of, like, running out of his, like, you know, satisfaction from what he did to her. And so now he has to move on to his next victim. And the victim he's picking is her sister, right? Which is literally the last person, like, real serial killers don't do that, right? Like, of all the people in the world you could kill, that's your worst choice if you don't want to get caught. And I will say this:
he doesn't know that person at all. I know some.
No teenager in the 70s has ever had more newspaper articles written about them than Lindsay Salmon, because he's got, like, a full book of like newspaper clippings of her. I'm like, she's like a 13-year-old girl. Like, why are there so many articles about her in the newspaper?
Well, because her sister was murdered, and literally every headline's like, sister of slain girl. Like,
yeah.
I'm a person of my own, thank you.
But again, even that, the movie does not, you could be like, okay, if you want to turn this into Suzy is in the afterlife trying to make sure that what happened to her doesn't happen to her sister, right? If that's what you're going to focus on and you're going to make that the propulsive thing of the movie, okay, fine. Like, I don't agree with that, but at least it'd be a driving factor. It's not even a driving factor in the movie, right? It's not like Suzy's like, I'm going to spend all of my time trying to make sure this doesn't happen to my sister. Kind of just happens, right? Things just kind of happen.
It's sequence over the course of the entire movie.
Yeah.
Where the sister is in peril and she does a little bit of investigating on her own and we think she might get caught. But yeah, it's kind of a non-entity. It really doesn't add on anything, really. And
it's also just not like Suzy trying to do things in the afterlife to stop it. It's just like she's just kind of watching.
No, that might be fun. That might be interesting.
Exactly. Interesting. That's what I'm saying. Like, okay, if that's how you want to focus it down on, okay, like you're leaving a lot of stuff out, but at least
it's very Hollywood, but I mean, there's a reason why people like Hollywood movies because they do have entertainment value. And that
if you're going to go thriller, then go thriller.
Sure.
Don't do this weird in-between mix-up, mash-up thing where you're trying to keep some of the esoteric sort of like thoughtful, contemplative stuff, but just squeezing it to the bone to fit in this thriller thing, which you also haven't fleshed completely out either. So the movie is cannot decide what it wants to be, and it suffers, really badly from that.
There's also the friend character. I think Clarissa is her name. The one
the weird girl with the black hair.
No, the one who's Suzy's friend, and they leave film club together.
Oh, she's there for one moment.
Her boyfriend's an asshole,
scene.
but like that would be an interesting person for Suzy to be like protecting from the afterlife because that would be a more realistic target for Harvey after he killed Suzy. Like, I don't know, that didn't work for me at all. That whole pursuing the sister thing, but there was another character that, I mean, I kind of thought, not remembering much about this, I hadn't seen it since it came out. There's another cornfield scene later on where Harvey is there and this other Clarissa, I think her name is there with her boyfriend, and Mark Wahlberg gets the shit kicked out of him in that scene. Yeah. And I kind of thought that's where that scene might be going, but no, she's never seen again and she's not important, but that could have been a thing. Yeah.
Again, it's one of these things where you can feel, right, in a book, you can then spend a chapter going into X, Y, and Z. And the movie's like, no, we'll just show the characters and then keep going. You get it, right? Let's keep going. Like that's what it feels like a little bit. It's like, how would anyone get what you're trying to do here? I do think, right, the scene where Lindsay goes into the house, take it out of the context of all the stuff we have problems with, really well constructed thriller sequence. I'm like, I know what's going to happen. I've seen the movie before. I don't even like the movie that much. We're near the end of the movie at this point where I'm just like, I want this movie to be done. And I'm still a little bit like leaning forward in my chair, like, being like, this is really well staged. Like
it is. It's very suspenseful. Tucci's great in that scene. I mean, when his only function is to be terrifying and creepy, he definitely, as I said before, he does it. And it is. It's one of those, it's a Rear Window type scene, right? It's you snuck into somebody's house, they know you're there, or they find out that you're there, and there's that cat and mouse thing. I love that stuff. Yeah. And it works pretty well here. I don't care enough about that character. I don't want anything bad to happen to her.
But she isn't like,
you kind of know that nothing bad is. So
you would assume,
undercuts the suspense a lot. Whereas if it was somebody other than Suzy's sister, I would be more fearful that something bad's going to happen to her.
Yeah. And so, but again, well constructed scene. I even think like, the sort of montaging that happens after where the police go to his house and he's like doing the thing with the safe where Suzy's body is. Yeah. Like, I think that scene is well done. I like the tension of that, and how it has to be slow. I like that it's slow, that it's like, no, you have to like end over end this freaking safe for like, I don't know, half a football field, it feels like. But
yeah, absolutely.
I like that. But again, in this scene though, we've got, again, it's one of these things it's tough, right? Because the book does do this. The book does do this thing where like Suzy kind of like inhabits, I can't remember her name, the black-haired girl's like body.
Rose? Is it Rose?
Rose? Is
yeah,
it
I think
Rose?
it's Rose, yeah.
Yeah. Inhabits her body for a little bit. It's more multi-purposed than just like, give me a kiss.
I don't like that scene at all. That's real weird and creepy.
It's real weird even in the book a little bit, but in the book it's like you can't see it, so it's like not as, in your face.
He's Ray is making out with Rose, but actually it's Suzy, and he's seeing Suzy, and that's I don't even want to unpack that one.
In the book, it's a little bit more
a bad
like
choice.
Like Rose is kind of like has a little bit of more of like an actual communication with Suzy in some ways, and is like, you can do the. You wanted this kiss. You can use me to have this kiss.
Yeah, that's not in the movie at all.
No, not in the movie at all.
It's like a possession thing, and Rose should feel pretty violated by that.
Yeah.
Never brought up again.
Also, like, you might want to consider, hey, the guy who killed me, he's dumping my body into the pit right outside the window right now. Do you want to go stop him? Like...
Well, it's important that she lets go of all that stuff, Bobby. Yeah. So, let her have that first kiss and move on to actual heaven, and karmic justice will come to Harvey, of course.
And in the movie, in the book, it's a really nice moment because it is her getting to have this one positive experience in this sort of like realm with a man, that she never got to have before she moves on, right? It's like the last thing she needs to do before she moves on. It is really nice and emotional. And of course, in the movie, it's just weird. You're just like, this is really weird. It's
extremely weird.
And it's come out of nowhere.
I was very uncomfortable during that scene. I was more uncomfortable in that scene than the lead up to the murder.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, like that, and that's basically how it ends. Like Rachel Weisz's character comes back, after Mark Wahlberg's character gets beaten up, and
My favorite Wahlberg moment in this movie is he comes down the stairs. He's in a like full body cast, and he sees her, and he says something like "my girl," and it's like it's a great delivery. It's a great look. Rachel Weisz is great in that scene. Susan Sarandon does nothing in that scene because we don't need wacky grandma to play much of a role here. I like that moment a lot, and by that point in the movie, it really had to work hard to make me like something. And I like that moment a lot. So give it that. A faint praise. There are some good minutes in this movie.
Yeah, there are some good minutes, I think is a good thing to say.
Put that on the back of the DVD box. Good minutes. Intrepid Filmographers.
Yeah, and it closes with that little mini monologue from Suzy, right? These are the lovely bones that grew up around, my absence.
The connections between the people that were affected by her, which is a theme that gets brought up in that moment and really never clicks any time before that. And it's like, that's kind of a nice idea. We should have started planting seeds for that an hour ago.
Yeah. And it doesn't do the full quote, which is so weird to me. Basically her saying like, again, the theme is like, it's almost like is like the cycle, right? Is the decay into life kind of idea of like, I get to give my life, but this other great stuff grew out of it, right? And that's really what the book is about. Like, it's the inspiration. When you said Peter Jackson's the book is positive and inspirational, that is what the inspiration is, right? That is the moment where you feel it the most, right? Which is this moment where it's like, I'm looking at this now, I've learned to let go. That really powerful thing in that line, which is like, I've learned to be able to hold the world without me in it. Like, amazing stuff. Like, this is such good that is such good writing, and is so profound in so many ways. The thing that most of us and all, have the most trouble in our brains, right? In the ego will not let us sort of do that, right? And I think it's beautiful in the book. And it's just a shame that isn't, like you said, the spine of the entire thing, right? And
it is. It's a really nice idea. It's a great idea to hang a movie on. And this is a movie that should center on that. Like you said, that affected me too. That's another good minute. It's like the last minute. Like, oh, okay. This makes sense. You could see the path this could have taken to sort of lead you to that in a more organic and more sort of fulfilling and substantial sort of way. And it just doesn't really do that. And
I think to do it, you has to be a less commercial play of a movie, right? Which is the problem. It's such a good, it's a bestseller. It's something that the obviously the studio is going to be like, we want this to be a movie that, gets that like bestseller box office, right? You know, we're going to hire Peter Jackson, like we're going to do all this stuff that we want this to be a big movie, right? And the real answer is, I mentioned it before, but this has got to be like a Tree of Life, like Terrence Malick.
Right, because
you know,
so much of these characters that we're supposed to now, like we as the audience have to leave Suzy behind, and we're left with all these other characters. But mostly what we've seen them do is, you know, thriller movie stuff, like Mark Wahlberg trying to bash down the door, and the sister character sneaking into the house, and you know, he's the dad figuring out suspects and reuniting with his wife. Like, it's all Hollywood stuff, whereas, you know, we need to see more moments where just they're purely grieving and coming together in their grief, and there's really just not much of that in here.
Yeah, I'm going to read another quote from the book, okay?
Please, this book sounds great.
Each time I told my story, I lost a bit, the smallest drop of pain. It was that day that I knew I wanted to tell the story of my family, because horror on Earth is real, and it's every day. It's like a flower or like the sun. It cannot be contained. Like these are big ideas, right?
Yeah.
These are huge ideas, you know, that the movie just doesn't do, right? It doesn't let you sit with these characters, doesn't let you live with these characters, and that's what the movie needs to do. And I get the inclination of what they did, but you need to just have scenes where it's like, where people like Brian Verderosa will be like, why was that scene in the movie? You know, like that.
Brian's not a Terrence Malick fan. Like, yeah. I was saying before, I would have loved to have seen Lynn Ramsey's version of this. I'm with you. I'd rather see Terrence Malick's version of this.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, but somebody who was willing to make a movie like that, right?
You could have made this instead of Knight of Cups. I don't know if that movie's bad. I
don't know either. I haven't seen that movie, so I don't know either.
It's probably great.
But yeah, I mean, there isn't too much more to say about this movie, to be, you know, totally honest with you. I think it's an unfortunate failure. I think it's really, truly the first real failure of his career. You know, I think it, you know, that you can like or dislike, and we have our problems with some of with like Meet the Feebles and stuff like that. But, you know, this movie is, I think, the first time he set out to do something and wasn't successful at what he was trying to do.
Yeah,
you know, I don't like Meet the Feebles, but he did what he wanted to do, right? He did.
It wasn't what we wanted, but yeah, it was what he wanted. You know, well, he used to say that, right? Like, I make the movies that I want to make for me, which every filmmaker says, but he said that before he became a named director. And I always liked that about him. And yeah, I agree. Up to this point, the track record's been pretty good. And, you know, King Kong had its excesses and it had its problems, but as an adaptation and as a modernization of this thing that he loved from when he was a child, it works. And almost everything works. And it's especially sad to me to think about what comes next, because, you know, we are in, with so many filmmakers we've talked about on this show, there is this sort of upswing. There's this redemptive arc. You know, Ben Affleck makes Live by Night, and then he makes Air, which is a perfectly wonderful movie. You know, Joe Wright has his commercial failures, and then his last movie is Cyrano, which is a pretty great movie also.
Yeah.
You know, Karen Kusama has had some late career or more recent successes. And here it's like this downward spiral that we have to follow now. Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, like, I think the first two Hobbit movies are perfectly fine, and the last one I think is bad.
I don't hate them either, but I do. You know, in terms of just the reach exceeding the grasp, in terms of him, you know, this like confidence that he had and this ability of him to turn unfilmable things into like the most incredible cinematic experiences ever. You know, by the lovely bones, those days are kind of over, and that's unfortunate. Yeah, and I mean, there's this one review I think you put in your the facts, the info sheet that you sent, which is like, I think true, which is, I think at this point when he's making the lovely bones, I think he's kind of lost the grasp on the visual effect side of things and what made his previous work be so impactful and look so good. And I think he's fully gone over to like everything in the computer, like, you know, and just a lack of design and stuff, which is really, I think, the biggest part Heavenly
of this.
Creatures, which the special effects are so primitive compared to what we see here, but they work so much better in that movie and they do feel so much more tangible. And here it's, you know, it just feels easy. There's nothing impressive looking in this movie.
There isn't.
It's the ideas behind them are impressive. The ships in the bottle, for example. But, I wouldn't call it particularly. This movie came in third at the box office, and number one was Avatar, one of the most visually stunning movies ever made up to that point, that has incredible use of CGI and incredible use of, as you were saying before, compositing, where, this entirely computer created world feels like a real place in that movie. And in this movie, there's just none of that weight. This also got beat by The Book of Eli, which I think is stealth a great movie, and people should see it.
I've not seen The Book of Eli, so I can't speak to that.
Love the Hughes brothers.
But
those guys need to make more movies.
Yeah, I don't think they work together anymore, right? Didn't Solo Hughes make a movie not that long ago?
Maybe. I don't know. All these brothers are always split. No, I don't have any siblings, so I don't know how that works.
They're always split.
But it's a little sad. The Safdies, the Coens are getting back together.
They said they are, yeah.
Hope so.
I'm going to see one of the Safdie movies tomorrow when we're recording this. I'm going to go see The Smashing Machine tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
I mean, I'm much more excited about the other one, but
me too. Yeah.
Marty Supreme.
Yeah. Great poster. Just saw that the other day.
Great poster and just great,
great idea.
What? That's what I want from a Safdie movie, which is just okay, sure. But yeah, so, I mean, that's going to do it, really. I mean, I think it does suck that, like I said, this is his first real failure, I think, of a directing job. And I think by the time we get done with the next three movies, I think, you're probably going to see very clearly why he decided to kind of just step away. I think, I mean, a big part of the Hobbit movies when we talk about them, right, is that he never wanted to make those movies, right? He really did not want to make them.
He shepherded the project with the intention of Guillermo del Toro doing it, which would have been not even necessarily better, more distinctive and more interesting, I think.
And somebody who was fresh to the world and really wanted to do it. And then, all these delays and everything, Totoro had to drop out. And then Jackson was basically like, look, if I don't do this, it's going to mean hundreds and hundreds of people out of a job.
Yeah.
It's going to mean really bad things for the New Zealand, film industry and all that infrastructure and stuff. So I'm just going to do it. I got to step up and do it. And
goes back to what I was saying. He's a well-meaning guy.
Yeah.
Even this, right? He wanted to say something really nice with this movie. He tried and he failed, but this was never supposed to be whatever nods this movie made to commercialism. It wasn't because Peter Jackson wanted to buy a nicer house, right? It was because, he knew this had to connect with the wider audience and he just wasn't able to do it. But, he doesn't seem like that crass sort of trend chasing sort of, has to be a crowd pleaser sort of. I don't know.
But I think when you have a certain amount of confidence,
his heart was in this.
His heart was definitely in it. Yes, of course.
It was misguided, but it wasn't malicious, and it wasn't crass.
Yeah, he's not a guy who I think ever is just in it for the paycheck and do something.
No. And you could see why he would want to do those movies, as you said, so all those people would get to work. I love his cameo in this movie. We didn't mention that. Yeah. He's holding the Super 8 camera in the camera store in the mall. I believe his son's in that scene also. Billy, I think his name is, Billy Jackson. So, he's still doing a lot of the things that we like, just not as well as.
There's a Lord of the Rings display in the bookstore.
I love the Lord of the Rings poster.
I'm maybe don't make us think about those movies when we're watching this movie.
But I feel like that would have been a poster in a bookstore in that particular period. It's a very cool looking poster. Also, when the movie starts to lose you, it's stuff like that you'd be like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so next time we're going to be talking about The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. Go to intrepidfilmographers.com, which is the Substack if you'd rather get it that way. We'll be back next time, but until then, thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you to everybody who is listening. Until next time, be good to one another. Later.